Hello and welcome everyone to the final talk of today. It's on driving AI adoption, and our speaker is Anna Shedletsky, CEO and founder of Instrumental Inc. Anna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And let's maybe get started. Let me just get my slides up. Awesome. So I'm here to talk about manufacturing and the future of infrastructure, I guess, and kind of the role that AI will likely play in this and is already playing in this. So specifically, hopefully like ending on a nice kind of upbeat note here at the end before the lunch session, how we're going to do 5 years of innovation in the next 18 months in the manufacturing space, and specifically how AI is going to make that possible. And we're going to talk about particular applications of AI to electronics manufacturing. Just a quick little bit about me so you have a sense of, you can judge my credibility on this topic. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so I'm not an AI engineer. I'm incognito here at this conference today, but we're applying. I work at a company. I founded a company that applies AI to electronics manufacturing problems. I was at Apple for 6 years. I led product design for a handful of iPods and system product design for the first generation Apple Watch. So that's where kind of my angle of this comes from, being an expert in the application field that we're building AI for. So just as a little bit of an introduction to electronics manufacturing, manufacturing is the world's largest industry. It is half of the world's gross world product comes from manufacturing. Electronics is a $3 trillion industry, so big piece of that. And there are tons of inefficiencies in this industry. And as a result of those inefficiencies, somewhere between 20 and 30 cents of every dollar that is spent in this industry is actually wasted. It's not just physical waste. We call it economic waste because it's a variety. It comes from a variety of different directions: scrap and rework, product returns. Everybody's had the experience of getting a product that does not work or up to expectations and having to swap that. Mistakes and experiments that are made by engineers during development, engineers like me, and lots of underutilized human resources. We used to fly people around the world to different places. If you have a line go down, it can cost you $20,000 an hour to be down one line. And then talk about a product like a phone where there might be 30 or 100 lines. It's very expensive to go down even for a couple of minutes. So this is a high stakes field, even if it's not a particularly sexy one, but there's a lot of really interesting problems to solve in it. So let's talk about why this waste occurs. And frankly, my experience in this waste, and kind of having grown up in one of the most admired companies in this field as an engineer, is that it's too hard to actually discover and fix the issues that cause it. So if we were able to actually discover the underlying problems that cause the waste, we're engineers, we would fix it, but it's too hard. And so we brute force it a lot. And the way that we brute force it is that we kind of go through this process. It's a very common engineering process to like figure out what the problem is, solve it, and then make sure it doesn't come back. That's the discover, solve, and monitor here. And the way that we do that in electronics manufacturing is that we'll discover issues through functional testing, manual inspectors, engineers that actually go on the ground. That was like me. I used to fly around the world all the time, go to these different places, try to actually be in the right place at the right time. Frankly, a lot of discovery of issues in electronics manufacturing is primarily luck-based, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And there's no room for luck, I think, in manufacturing. To solve these problems, often you needed engineers on the ground like me to actually move tapes around, use Sharpie, like rip stuff apart, put it back together. Frankly, it was the most fun part of the job, but that is the kind of the main method for solving problems that can cause this waste. And then ultimately, once you have solved the problem, you want to validate that it works. And there's all sorts of monitoring technologies around testing or doing automated optical inspection. That's the AOI jargon if you're not familiar. All sorts of different reports coming from the factories. There's data from the MES, the manufacturing execution system, which is like the factory side system. And then the worst kind of data you can get, which is your actual customer return data. And so if you're kind of coming at manufacturing from the software engineering perspective, you're used to living in a world with lots of dev tools, lots of data, lots of dashboards. That's not manufacturing. Manufacturing is primarily still today, even some of the most high-tech devices are built with paper and pencil kind of techniques. There certainly are technology, they're just not well integrated. And that data is ultimately very siloed and so very difficult to get at. And therefore dashboarding is not something that's very common. And so if the goal is to actually discover and fix these issues that cause this waste, this has become a lot harder recently due to the pandemic because the engineers can no longer go there. And this is something that's been happening now since about mid-February when after Chinese New Year, when things were supposed to open up and they didn't. And so the entire electronics industry, particularly consumer electronics, have this huge gaping hole where they not only can't try to reduce the waste they have in their normal status quo, they now have this hole of how they're actually going to both discover and solve problems because they can't go there anymore. And so bridging this gap with technology and data is kind of the opportunity of the moment if we're talking about the pandemic. Of course, before the pandemic, there was still lots of waste, and so there's still a need for this. It's just been exacerbated in the last couple of months. So a lot of ideas that we encounter when we talk to customers in this space who are thinking about how they're going to solve at least the immediate problem of trying to solve problems remotely for the first time in manufacturing is they have all sorts of ideas about like replacing a sucky process they already have with something even suckier, which is like, let's just add cameras to every step and like, let's watch the live streams, or these kinds of ideas that replace that concept of trying to be in the right place at the right time with something that's even less even more unwieldy. And so, they might have an idea like, let's take images on the line, but really taking an image on the line is just the first step. You have to actually get the data back to an engineer wherever they are who can actually do something to not only discover the issue, but solve it. And so if you think about the steps that are involved in that, yeah, taking a high quality image is not a bad idea, but you need to have that data, that image actually associated with the serial number of the unit you're taking it of so that you can do something of merit. So every phone, for example, has a serial number associated with it. You want to be able to go back and find that specific phone. If it goes on later and fails a test, it matters which unit it was. And so you need that traceability is very key. That's complex. You can't just get that off of a live stream from a cell phone mounted over a line. You need to aggregate that data somewhere, ideally in the cloud, so it's available to a distributed team of people that are working globally. And frankly, the teams work globally even before the pandemic, so that's not new, but the openness to aggregate this data in cloud-based systems is much more open than it has been in past years. But if you aggregate all this data, you're taking all these pictures, you're taking video, you have too much data. So having too much data in a cloud is still a problem. You need to do something kind of magical to figure out what's important there. And that's really the opportunity of AI in this particular problem chain, is figuring out what in this data, no matter how you got it, what in this data is important that can actually enable an engineer to discover and solve problems, just to bridge the gap that was already there, but also to start chipping away at the broader problem of the waste in the industry. And so that step 4 is kind of where AI comes in. So it's a unique element because it can find what matters where computer vision technologies cannot. So specifically when I talk about computer vision, again, I'm a mechanical engineer, so maybe I'm not using the words exactly right, but what I mean are conventional methods that have been around for a couple decades, Huff lines, getting edges, seeing sift features, all that kind of stuff. That's what I mean when I say computer vision, like looking at and measuring pixels. Whereas AI analysis is a little bit different. And what it can do is it can discover new things. And so computer vision generally is used to measure something that's known. Like I want to measure this gap between this edge and that edge. I want you to find the edge and measure the gap. That's like a known issue, but AI can actually discover issues that haven't been seen before, that it hasn't been particularly trained to necessarily find, because you can train it on things that are good and have it find things that are different from that. You can't do that with computer vision. It's too rules based. So it's very difficult for certain types of applications. And it can also still monitor for known issues. So it has some overlap to the capabilities of traditional computer vision, particularly well applied in this application of looking for defects in electronic products. So when it's implemented well, it can actually be what I put here, 30 times cheaper and 30 times faster to set up than traditional computer vision algorithms for the electronics industry in the way that electronics works today, with systems integrators and hardware and all of that. It can be much cheaper and easier. And it can be applied to areas on the line that computer vision doesn't work well for. And one of the reasons is that computer vision requires essentially custom algorithms for everything. And that custom algorithm has to be tuned by someone who's very experienced. Whereas an AI algorithm, if packaged properly, could be tuned by someone who's not particularly experienced and just knows the difference between a good unit and a bad one. So if you look at like a yield Pareto, so if you're from outside manufacturing, you might not have seen one of these before. This is a bar graph that is essentially what all manufacturers kind of look at to understand how they're doing. And this Pareto is the yield of the defect rates of various things sorted by the highest defect rate. So it always looks like this. So with computer vision, you might be able to monitor the top 2 issues only, just with the amount of time and effort it takes to get it up and running. But with AI, you could get value across maybe 50 plus images with 50 plus issues with the same amount of input. And so I'm going to talk specifically around a dark yield use case. So what is dark yield? Dark yield are things that are defects that can't be found any other way besides through some kind of inspection process, which might have been done only previously before by humans, but not in the right spots on the line. And so we can find dark yield in places, our technology, our AI can find dark yield in places that humans aren't inspecting. Cable routing, things that are unstructured, like where those wires go, small differences in solder, what it looks like. So on the right is what cold solder looks like. It has a different luminosity. Connectors that aren't fully seated that might pass a functional test, but you put it in a box, it's going to come out and not work when a customer gets it. Or parts that are misassembled. Here we're looking at a screw that's not fully seated. You can't functionally test a screw. Dark yield is super expensive. Having a product that has one less star will reduce sales by 50%. You can have products that explode in the field, and this can really impact not only brand perception, but actually stock value. And in the worst case, you can hurt people. In the case of the Takata airbags, that company actually went bankrupt, and people died as a result of not being able to detect issues they should have been able to find. So this is some of the data that comes out of our system. We've been able to aggregate across multiple customers in production for like what are kind of the top yield hitters, what are the things that dark yield that aren't being caught by conventional systems in electronics manufacturing. These are examples of those top 5 issues coming from that real customer data aggregated together. Things like tapes and labels that are either missing or misassembled, missing foams, which are important to keep connectors down, keep things plugged in, missing parts, cable routing, which we described, and glue issues. And these dark yield failure rates actually add up quite significantly. There's a lot of, you might think that like, oh, does it matter if my tape is missing? Well, on 1.2% of units, the tape is missing. That's a big number of all units that are built. So if you add up across a device, what is the probability that some part is missing or something is misassembled? It's actually quite high because this list goes on beyond just these 5. So we want to be able to find them. And so what AI can do is it can convert these dark yield issues into what's called yield loss. So these are issues that you actually know about. We take something we can't see. By definition, you cannot measure dark yield because you can't functionally test for it. But AI can find it and actually turn that into yield loss, things that you know that you're failing. You can fail those units. And then once you are failing those units, you can measure monitor, and ultimately eliminate that failure mode. And so what AI can do is it can actually do this very important thing, which is sort anomaly. And so here we're actually looking at 10 images of a zoomed in part of a grounding spring. And what the AI has actually done is sorted it from most anomalous up here in this region to least anomalous down here. And what a human does is they just need to establish what is the threshold between okay and not okay, or not good here. And it doesn't need golden units. It doesn't need failing examples, although there are failing examples here. But by establishing this, we essentially reduce the amount of labeling that a user has to do to actually establish what's going on, because we've done a lot of the heavy lifting by doing the sort. And so that's where AI is kind of converting this into something where you can actually start to fail these units that you wouldn't have been able to detect that they had those issues. I'm just kind of looking at the time. We're almost done here. We'll have some chance for questions, but I want to share a little bit about the AI that we have happened to build to solve this particular problem. It's really optimized specifically for the problem we're solving in manufacturing, which is it's too hard to find and solve these issues that cause returns and rework and scrap. And so here's some of the metrics that we've built it around and kind of why we've built it this way. So we only need about 30 units worth of data to get started in order to start providing value in what we call the development stage. So this is when customers are building products before they're building them for their customers. So prototype versions of their products. We only need 30 units to get started. That was a core requirement for the AI to have a very low number of initial seeding units, because our customers won't build thousands of units or hundreds of thousands of units until they're in production. And they need to get value much earlier to discover these issues earlier. Most of these applications in terms of, like this coding or glue or these cable routings can actually be trained by non-data scientists, non-computer scientists in 30 seconds or so using the application that we have. We take a generating algorithm and then a particular application algorithm can be quickly trained by someone who only has the expertise of knowing what is a good and what is a bad unit. And that doesn't require a ton of labeling like a traditional AI application might. It's really great at unstructured anomalies, things like glue overflow or cables, where it would be very difficult to use computer vision, rules-based techniques. You don't need to tell it where to look, but you can. So in a particular product, our customers may identify regions of interest as shown here, but we can also look globally across this image for things that might be outside those regions to find anomalies in those areas that they did not expect. That is the whole point of discovering new issues. And then something that's interesting about what we do is that we can these algorithms can actually be trained without bad examples. So in the beginning, you might have 30 good units and they might not have a defect in this area, but you can actually set up a test to monitor that when there is an anomaly discovered in this area, it will actually stop that unit on the line. And so that's a little bit unusual or different from how some AIs are written. So just as kind of a quick wrap up, wanted to come back to how COVID is impacting this particular industry, because I think it's contemporaneous and interesting to learn about that. Essentially what's happening is because people cannot be traveling and they're trying to find and fix these issues, there is a absolutely insatiable thirst for data. And that's creating rapid tech adoption in the space that really has not done a lot of technology adoption in the last couple of decades. So what are the problems they're looking to solve? They want to know what's going on. They want to know how to improve. And so what they're doing is they're actually seeking more testing, more measurement, more data that typically in the past that those data systems were very siloed. And there's a significant need right now to get cloud-based systems up and get this data in these cloud-based systems that are aggregating across multiple places in the world, across multiple pieces of equipment. And there's a lot of investment happening right now in smart capabilities in this industry, where there was always kind of a little skepticism about them. And so there's a lot happening. And so why will that lead to a lot of innovation? Essentially, they need to do this to survive at this point. So it's a need, it's not a want. And I think that there's kind of two key things that are going to happen, and that are happening. One is that the cloud is going to get fully unlocked for this space. There have been some brands who have older conceptions around on-prem being safer, which of course it's not always. And so cloud is really the way to be able to enable distributed manufacturing, distributed oversight of the data, distributed ability to actually make changes to the line. And then the last thing here, I think that kind of needs around social distancing in this very high touch industry where hundreds of people literally touch the same thing as it goes down the line, will provide tailwinds for automation. I think that those tailwinds will really be around the cost of human workers versus the providing essentially an ROI, stronger ROI for industrial automation, which could be good. And when you put these two things together, you get something really magical and really exciting. And so it's a very exciting industry to be in. And so just kind of wanted to sum up that, like, really the opportunity in the electronics manufacturing space for AI is to help put the right data, the specific useful data at the right resolution in front of the right people so they can solve problems. If you're interested in seeing a demo of our AI, you can scan this QR code here. It'll take you to a YouTube video. There's no ads or anything. You can take a look at it there. And if you're interested in the types of things we're doing, we are hiring onto our AI team, and you can scan that code there. But at this point, I'd love to open it up to questions and see if I can answer a few.
Thanks so much, Anna. It looks like we do have a few questions coming in on Slido. So
okay.
Yeah, is there any one in particular you'd like to begin with?
Okay, let's talk about, we'll take one from Simon D here at the top. How to deal with design changes while avoiding retraining models from scratch. Are there ways to generalize some of the AI-driven tests? This is a good question. I'm going to just preface that I'm not our AI expert. However, the point that you brought up around dealing with design changes is a really good point, because in development, they are happening. And so the way that we deal with that is it only takes 30 seconds to essentially build a new test. And the way we're doing that is we have here I'm gonna stop sharing so you can see my hand gestures. The way we're doing that is we have one kind of vanilla generating algorithm. And then when it sees something, I'm trying to see something on my desk, but it's going to look at the front of a phone. That's the application. It's going to look at the front of a phone that's being produced on a line. And so we'll take a small copy of that, and then it will get trained specifically to do this one thing, which is to look at the front of this phone. If this phone changes, like maybe they add something or it's a different size, you'll need to retrain elements of that algorithm, but that retraining process of building a new test is only about 30 seconds. So what we did is we made it so easy to make a test that it's like not too much of a problem if there are changes, because there definitely are changes in development that necessitate some algorithms not being useful anymore. Let's see. Here's one from Kartik Lambda, who asks, can you talk a bit about the hardware you deploy onto the production line, camera processing, et cetera? Does the compute happen on site or in the cloud? Awesome. Okay, so this is a great question, because I think for AI, it's very relevant where the compute is happening. AI is not generally the cheapest option to solve a problem. So it's important to think about these things. So we, as a company, Instrumental, what we do is we provide essentially a reference design that can be easily deployed onto a line. It's like an appliance. It has some edge compute on it, so we can do real-time, low latency results, because that's very important. We deploy primarily in places in the like very rural China, where the internet tube is really tiny. So we don't want to be having to get that up to a cloud, do processing there, and then push down a result. It's going to take too long. It could take minutes, which is too long. There's other companies in the space, just to be a little bit more broad beyond Instrumental, where they're either software only or they're hardware emphasized, and they might do all the compute and the training at the edge. We do all of our training in the cloud, and the reason being is that enables us to to have frankly, it's more powerful because the AI has more exposure to things versus only the stuff that it sees at the edge. It's a different concept. We're a software company, not a hardware company. And so that structure is a little bit different. Yeah, I think that answered the question.
Great, thank you. And I think we're gonna have to move on for now, but thank you, Anna. That was a fascinating presentation.
Great. Hope to hear from you all.
Absolutely. And just a few last housekeeping things before I let you all go. Attendees, thank you also for your engagement on Slido and great questions. And a friendly reminder to all to join your fellow conference attendees and presenters at the virtual networking event and happy hour, which you can follow or you can attend by following the link to the next session on the conference event page. Thanks all for helping kick off such a great first day of our conference, and we'll see you in the happy hour.